Welcome back to Stormi Talks True Crime on my Girls Rock Productions channel. In this week's video, I'll be talking about the story behind 3 different movies and docuseries. Most recently in the Max series, Love and Death, the story of Candy Montgomery and Betty Gore. This story has it all: love, friendship, betrayal, and an axe murder. I will start by giving a little bit of backstory on everyone, starting with our leading lady, Candy Montgomery. Candy Montgomery was born Candace Lynn Wheeler on November 15, 1949 in Lucas, Texas. She was raised as an Army brat and spent a majority of her youth moving from one military town to the next. She finally started her adult life and found some stability when she met and married her husband, Pat Montgomery, who was an electrical engineer. The two had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and moved to Fairview, Texas in 1977. She was considered the normal suburban housewife. At the time of the move, Candy and Pat's marriage seemed picture perfect to outsiders, but Candy considered her marriage very boring and longed for something more. After settling down in their new home, Candy and her husband began attending the Methodist Church of Lucas, which became the center of Candy's world. It was during a church service that she first met Betty, and the two became close friends. Now, Betty Gore was born Betty Eileen Pomeroy on January 9, 1950 in Harper, Kansas. She grew up with her 2 brothers close by in Norwich, Kansas. She married her college math teacher, Alan Gore, in 1970. The two would have 2 daughters and 2 Cocker Spaniels. Betty was described in a Texas Monthly profile in 1984 as one of those girls whose conventionality made her the frequent center of attention. She was very pretty, and she had an innocence about her and a wide Hollywood smile that made her one of the most popular girls in her tiny hometown of Norwich, Kansas. In January of 1970, Alan took a job at an electronics conglomerate called Rockwell International. In 1976, Betty took a teaching job at the R.C. Dodd Middle School, teaching the 5th grade. She didn't enjoy her work for very long, and she couldn't control her unruly students, but at the same time, she couldn't stand to be left alone at home when Alan had to travel for work. Despite all this, Betty decided the two should try to have their second child. She began planning her pregnancy down to the exact week so that the baby would be born in midsummer, so she wouldn't have to take any time off from teaching. This made Alan resentful, as he felt their sex had become completely mechanical. As his marriage became strained, he and Candy grew close after colliding at a church volleyball game. In 1978, Candy became infatuated with her best friend's husband after colliding with him going for the ball in the church volleyball game. Candy thought he smelled sexy and began to fantasize about having an affair with him. One night after choir practice, she approached Alan in his car to tell him about her feelings. Alan stated that the feelings were mutual, but he rejected her offer at first because Betty had just become pregnant with their second child, and it wouldn't have been fair to her. He did, however, give Candy a kiss. They met up on Candy's 29th birthday, where they discussed the details of their planned affair, establishing a rule that if either of them started getting emotionally involved, they would end things. They officially started having the affair on December 12, 1978, which continued for several months. While Candy reportedly felt guilty about deceiving Pat, she never felt uncomfortable around Betty and even threw her a baby shower. Candy and Alan continued the affair even after Betty gave birth in July of 1979. Shortly after Betty gave birth to their second child, Alan and Betty decided to work on their marriage, causing Alan to end the affair with Candy. Now, Candy was distraught at first, but she didn't do anything drastic. After all, she still had her marriage to Pat, so she decided that she was going to work on that marriage as well. For a while, everything went back to normal, and Alan and Candy believed that their affair remained their little secret. But in the summer of 1980, things would take a turn for the worse. On Friday, June 13th, 1980, Alan was away on a business trip and began to worry when his wife Betty didn't answer any of his calls. He asked a neighbor to check on her, but Betty didn't answer. He then called Candy, who was watching their older daughter at the time, and she assured him that Betty was fine. However, after several more attempts to contact Betty, Alan grew more worried. He then asked his neighbor to enter the Gore's home as a wellness check. The neighbor discovered a horrifying scene. He found the infant daughter in her crib covered in her own excrement and oceans of blood leading up to the utility room door. The neighbor called to inform Alan that Betty was dead, presuming at the time that she had been shot. Distraught, Alan called Candy again about 11:30 p.m., informing her of Betty's death and asking if she could continue to watch his older daughter. She agreed and broke down crying in Pat's arms later that evening. The next morning, the police reported that Betty was murdered with an axe and that they found a bloody footprint in the house. Upon learning this news, Candy used a pair of garden shears to cut up her rubber sandals, which prosecutors said was done to destroy any suspicion based on the pattern of the soles. It was soon found out that Candy was the last person to see Betty alive. Because of this, she became a main suspect. The police questioned her several times, and although her alibi seemed airtight, that all changed when Alan admitted to having an affair with Candy, giving the police a motive for the killing. Candy was arrested and charged with Betty's murder, which she denied committing. She was later released on bail and given full support from her church, where she hired her lawyer, Don Crowder, to represent her. Crowder later enlisted psychiatrist and clinical hypnotist Dr. Fred Faison to uncover Candy's memories from that day. Through several hypnosis sessions, Faison said that he discovered that Candy had experienced childhood trauma, which led to her rage as an adult. He was also able to piece together what happened the day of Betty's killing, which Candy later recounted during her October 1980 trial, where she pleaded self-defense in Betty's murder. Jailers did note on her cuts on her toe and bruises on her head as she changed into her prison uniform, which did show that there was some kind of a struggle. According to Candy, on Friday, June 13, 1980, Betty confronted her about her affair with Alan. She stated at first everything seemed normal when she was stopping by to pick up the Gore's older daughter's swimsuit, but then Betty asked about the affair out of the blue. Betty told Candy where she could find the swimsuit, and as her back was turned, Candy states that Betty went into the utility room to grab an axe. Betty then used the axe to attack her. Candy was able to eventually gain control of the axe, and she hit Betty in the head as they continued to struggle. Betty was stunned, but not dead. Then, according to Candy, Betty lifted her finger to shush her, just as her mother used to do when she would get hurt as a child. This brought out that pinned-up rage, causing Candy to proceed to hit Betty 41 more times with the axe, primarily in the face, and she only stopped at the point of exhaustion. Betty's torso, arms, and legs were also mutilated in the attack. Candy then showered, returned home to change, and went to church to teach Bible class, as if nothing had happened. She even left the Gore's infant daughter in the crib, which, as a mother myself, I find it hard to believe that another mother would do that. Montgomery's trial began in October 1980, and it lasted 8 days. It would come out in the trial that, aside from the bloody footprint, police also found blood on the bathroom wall and drain, which suggested the killer washed themselves before fleeing. A 5-year-old friend of the Gore's older daughter had come to play and saw Montgomery leave the house at around 11 a.m. The little girl stated that she was wet when leaving the house. The defense would call several character witnesses to the stand, many of which who would talk about how Betty was abrasive, somewhat paranoid, and severely depressed, and it only became worse after having the newborn. Today, she probably would have been diagnosed with postpartum depression. They would all describe Candy in a very different light. pretty much the complete opposite of Betty. In stunning fashion, the jury of 9 women and 3 men came back with a not guilty verdict, deeming that Candy did act in self-defense. Despite being acquitted, Candy and everyone else involved were affected in the aftermath of the murder and trial. Alan Gore was devastated by the death of his wife. He blamed himself for the incident and lost custody of their 2 daughters, who were given to the Pomeroys, Betty's parents. According to reports from the Dallas Morning News back in 2023, Alan quickly remarried and moved away from Wiley after the trial. He and his new wife have since divorced. His Facebook profile reveals that he is currently retired and living in Sarasota, Florida, where he has been in a domestic partner relationship since 2016. There is no word on whether or not he has kept in contact with Candy since 1980. Pat Montgomery, the only innocent adult alive in this sordid story, moved away from Texas to Georgia with Candy and their children after the trial. He was hoping to have a fresh start with a clean slate, but the couple would get divorced in 1986. He is now in his 70s and living a relatively quiet life away from the public eye and goes by the name of James. It is unclear whether he still resides in Georgia. There is also no information on whether he has been in touch with Candy since their separation. As for Candy, the femme fatale herself, she has largely avoided the public spotlight and shunned interview requests. Candy and her family moved out of Texas 3 months after the trial, settling in Georgia. As said before, she stayed with her husband, Pat, at first, but they would eventually get a divorce 4 years later. She remained in Georgia, living under her maiden name, Candace Wheeler. Since the trial, Candy has stayed out of the public eye and attempted to distance herself from the killing. When contacted in 2000 by the Dallas Morning News to discuss the 20th anniversary of the murder, Candy responded, "I'm telling you in big, bold letters, I'm not interested." Now 74, Candy is believed to still be living in Georgia, where she reportedly works as a mental health worker, of all things. Some reports indicate that she might work with her daughter. When Jessica Biel portrayed her in the Hulu miniseries Candy, she attempted to make contact with Candy, but again, she was not interested. Since the murder and trial, there have been a book, 2 series, and a movie based on the crime. The book examining the case and events that followed is entitled Evidence of Love, A True Story of Passion and Death in the Suburbs, and was written by Dallas-based journalists John Bloom and Jim Atkinson. It was released in January of 1984. In the 1990 CBS TV movie, A Killing in a Small Town, based on the case but with the names changed, Barbara Hershey won the Emmy Award and the Golden Globe Award portraying the lead character Kathy Morrison. Jessica Biel portrays Montgomery in the Hulu series Candy, which debuted in May of 2022. And most recently, Montgomery was portrayed by Elizabeth Olsen in the Max series Love and Death, which debuted in April of 2023. In this version, Betty is portrayed by one of my favorite actors from American Horror Story, Lily Rabe. Of the 2 series, I actually preferred the Love and Death. While the acting was great in both, and both are worth watching, I just liked the way they actually told the story more in Love and Death. As for the verdict itself, before seeing the series or reading about the case, it was hard to believe that someone could really hack someone to death with an axe in self-defense. It really just sounds absurd, but after going over everything, I think it's a lot more complicated than what meets the eye. We will never know what exactly happened that Friday the 13th morning in 1980, but if Betty was suffering from postpartum depression, then it is very probable that she could have initially attacked Candy. My main problem with the self-defense claim is that after Betty was down from the first blow, then Candy should have just been able to escape. I know they did say that, Betty was blocking the door or whatever, but I mean, she was down from being hit in the head with the axe. She should have been able to get past her. The other 41 blows were definitely not in self-defense. And she couldn't have completely blacked out about the whole thing, as Dr. Fasson suggested in the trial, because she did have the sense to cut up her sandals after finding out about the footprints. So even if she was blacked out through the shower, that doesn't explain the shoes days later. So basically, I'm torn on the verdict with this one. I definitely think that if someone shushing her can catapult her into a murderous rage, she really shouldn't be counseling other people with their problems, because she obviously needs help on her own. But tell me what you think on the story in the comments below. You can also post suggestions on cases you would like to hear about next. Remember to like the video and subscribe to my Girls Rock Productions channel for more content. While you're here, check out some of my other playlists. On Stormi Teaches Music, I do live covers and guitar lessons on Mondays and Wednesdays at 11 p.m. Eastern. I do the live covers on Mondays and the lesson for the song I covered on Wednesdays. Now, right now, the live streams are on a little bit of a hiatus because my daughter snapped a string on my guitar, and she also broke my guitar stringing tool. So I'm needing to wait until I can get some of that stuff in before I can start those back up. I will let you know, and once I do have them started back up, I will start on the Wednesday at 11 p.m. Eastern doing the lesson for Almost Lover, a long past due one, Almost Lover by A Fine Frenzy. And then after that, it will pick up with the normal routine of the cover on Monday, the lesson on Wednesday. On my Stormi Tells Ghost Stories, I talk about a different haunted city each month and tell true ghost stories out of that city. These videos are posted Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. And finally, don't forget to tune in next Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern for next week's video on Stormi Talks True Crime. Until then, have a great week and stay safe.